Today, an average citizen of any country with reasonably open access to the internet, about 1/3 of the global population, 2 billion people, can do something quite remarkable. They can see pictures, taken from the sky, of almost any location on the planet. They can get a bird's-eye perspective on where they live, where they might want to travel, or almost any other place of interest, going beyond what a simple map or atlas can show them. They can see where the Sydney Opera House is situated at the north shore of Sydney Cove in Australia. They can see how the Eiffel Tower anchors the northwest end of the Champ de Mars. They can see the Maracana Stadium in Rio de Janeiro where the 1950 and the 2014 FIFA World Cup finals were played. They can see the Colorado River flowing through the Grand Canyon. And they can find the location of a house or a business that they have never visited before. What they see is not in real time. The pictures may be months old, but the details that can be seen are often as small as 1 foot square. This represents a significant technological achievement, and significant investment of time and money in its infrastructure. As with many technologies, it originated with the military. During the First and Second World Wars, its use was almost exclusively offensive, scouting for potential targets before a battle and assessing damage to the enemy afterwards. However, after World War II, the intelligence community had an alternate military use for the technology, using it as a defensive weapon, a monitoring tool and a deterrent. That use got a very public test, over what are now these thickets near San Cristobal, Cuba, a little more than 50 years ago, in October 1962.
My fellow citizens, this government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba. Within the past week, unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island. The purpose of these bases can be none other than to provide a nuclear strike capability against the Western Hemisphere. The characteristic of these new missile sites indicate two distinct types of installations. Several of them include medium-range ballistic missiles capable of carrying a nuclear warhead for a distance of more than 1,000 nautical miles. Each of these missiles, in short, is capable of striking Washington, D.C., the Panama Canal, Cape Canaveral, Mexico City, or any other city in the southeastern part of the United States, in Central America, or in the Caribbean area. Additional sites not yet completed appear to be designed for intermediate range ballistic missiles, capable of traveling more than twice as far, and thus capable of striking most of the major cities in the Western Hemisphere, ranging as far north as Hudson's Bay, Canada, and as far south as Lima, Peru. In addition, jet bombers, capable of carrying nuclear weapons, are now being uncrated and assembled in Cuba, while the necessary air bases are being prepared. This urgent transformation of Cuba into an important strategic base by the presence of these large, long-range, and clearly offensive weapons of sudden mass destruction constitutes an explicit threat to the peace and security of all the Americas.
President Kennedy goes on to explain that the Soviet leaders had assured him that their activities in Cuba were non-aggressive, and that the true nature of those activities, now discovered, border on an active war. Finally, he outlines the steps that the United States will take to contain this perceived threat. What evidence was President Kennedy referring to in this speech, and where did it come from? It came from a roaming mechanical eye, 13 miles above the ground. The Lockheed U-2. After World War II, the United States military attempted to fly reconnaissance missions to monitor Soviet activities within Soviet borders. However, as might be expected, Soviet air defenses aggressively attacked these flights as they attempted to enter Soviet airspace. The Soviet anti-aircraft artillery, missiles, fighters, and radar were sufficiently capable of matching the speed and altitude of the converted bombers that were being used. The United States Air Force suggested that an aircraft that could fly at 70,000 feet would be able to avoid, or elude, these threats, and solicited proposals for such an aircraft. The designs they received in response all shared one common characteristic: in order to reach that altitude, steps were taken to reduce the weight of the aircraft. Armament was removed. Fixed landing gear were removed in favor of detachable gear and skids. 2 engines were reduced to 1. The result were aircraft that looked and behaved more like gliders than combat aircraft. To the Air Force this was unacceptable, with one general commenting that he was not interested in an airplane without wheels or guns. Also following World War II, the United States Central Intelligence Agency was created. It was given a civilian mission of gathering information about foreign governments, corporations, and individuals, and furnishing analysis of that information in regards to national security for senior government policymakers. The CIA relied on military aerial reconnaissance for some of that analysis and were feeling hampered by the quality of intelligence that the Air Force was collecting. They learned of Lockheed's design proposal for the new high-flying jet, later designated the U-2, and, not having the operational constraints the military wanted to put on the aircraft, petitioned President Eisenhower for permission to develop and operate the aircraft themselves, an investment in technology and staff far beyond anything the CIA had yet done. Eisenhower approved the project. And, the first U-2 started making overflights of the Soviet Union in 1956. The overflights did not go undetected for long by the USSR, however, there was not much they could do about them. Until a widely publicized incident in 1960, when they were able to shoot one of them down. In the summer and early autumn of 1962, U.S. intelligence agents started getting reports from ground observers of increased military activity on the island of Cuba, and photo interpreters had noticed that Cuban surface-to-air missiles had been deployed in a pattern similar to those used by the Soviet Union to protect its ICBM bases. However, for various reasons, overflights of Cuba had been suspended for a while during this time period. When flights did resume, on October 14, a very specific flight path was requested by the intelligence analysts in order to gather evidence based on the most credible of the reports that had been received. It was that flight, and the 928 pictures taken on it, that provided Kennedy the evidence he needed to make his speech to the American people, and present his case to the United Nations. The U-2 is not the only surveillance aircraft, but it represents some of the most advanced technology in photography, aircraft, and how one puts a camera 13 miles in the air traveling 430 miles per hour and has it take high-resolution photographs of discernible features on the ground as small as 2 feet across. It is built on ideas about optics that were demonstrated as early as 1038 by Alhazen of Basra with the camera obscura. On the principles of powered flight that were worked out by the Wright brothers and demonstrated in December 1903. And when the two technologies met, inevitably, a few short years later in 1908 when the first pictures were taken not of, but on board, an airplane in flight. 50 years later, men were on the edge of space, able to see and record what was happening below, and prevent, perhaps for a third time, the type of conflict that was originally called simply, the Great War. For, how could there ever be one more devastating to mankind?